Hi, I'm Jack from Trike, and today we're going to look at how to align the front end of our Trike. We're going to start with the Trike Tour. This is a linkage steering trike, so any of you that have any of the linkage steering trikes, the same principles will apply. And for demonstration purposes, we've got this trike up in a stand so it's easy to film. This is a very easy operation to do on the floor. In fact, it's probably easier to do when the trike is setting on the floor. For demonstration purposes, we've pre-loosened the stop nuts at the end of the tie rods. So there are stop nuts on either end of both tie rods. One thing to realize about these stop nuts and tie rod ends is that one end of each of them is reverse threaded, meaning there's a standard right-hand thread and then there's a left-hand thread on the other end. I'll explain why in a moment. The way you know which end is the reverse thread is there's a little line, a divot that's stamped right into the end of the tie rod. It's tough to see on camera, but it's very obvious if you're looking at your tie rod. Okay. First tool you're going to need is a standard tape measure or a yardstick, a long ruler, anything like that will work. And what you're going to want to do is make sure that your handlebar is parallel to the outrigger tubes. Easiest way to do that is to measure and sight it against the back edge, and make sure that that measurement is the same so that your handlebar stays parallel. Through this whole operation, you want your handlebar to stay parallel to the outrigger tubes. Quick tip, little trick of how to do that. Okay, a quick tip of how to keep your handlebar parallel to the outrigger tubes is on the bottom of the steering brace, underneath the frame down here, there's a bolt that holds the steering brace on. And if you take that and tighten it down tight, it'll make your handlebar stiff so it can't move. Remember to loosen that back up 1/4 turn after this operation is done. So once you've gotten that parallel, the next thing you need to do is you need to make sure that one of your wheels, and it really doesn't matter which side you work with, that one of your wheels is parallel with the frame. And the easiest way to do this is you take your tape measure and you measure from the boom as level as you can out to the center bead of your tire. Now your tire usually has a little line where it's been molded in the middle. If you've ridden enough that it's worn off, you can measure to the inside and there's a ridge in the middle of the rim. So either one of those techniques will work. But you want to measure to the leading edge and then from the frame, against the frame, to the trailing edge and compare those two measurements. They should be the same. If they're the same, your wheel is parallel to your frame. If they're not the same, you can move your tie rod by twisting it up and down, and you can see the wheel is moving back and forth. So, you know, I'm off by about 1/4 inch in the front, so I'm going to get lined up here and move that in. And now I'm right on. I have the same measurement here as I have here. So I know that one side of my trike now is lined up, my handlebar's parallel to the outrigger tubes, and my wheel is parallel to the frame. At this point, I can tighten these down. I thumb tighten them right now. And then I'll take the wrench and crank those down good and tight. Okay, the next operation is to measure from the wheel that you've just made parallel with the frame to the other wheel. And we want to get the two wheels parallel. We're going to set this trike up neutral, meaning the wheels are perfectly parallel with each other for starters. And then we'll talk about some toe in and toe out techniques. The easiest way to do this, again, you want to try and get the leading edge. So you measure against the tire all the way to the center bead on the other side. And then you measure back behind here, right over the top of the frame. It's kind of tough to see here, but you run the tape measure right over the top of the frame, kind of weave it in through all the cables against the tire and to the center bead on the other side. And it's off just a little bit, so I'm going to adjust that slightly. And there we go. So now, at this point, both wheels are parallel to each other. The handlebars are parallel to the frame, so everything is set up neutral. Good and tight. Now that everything's all tightened up in the tie rods and we're set up neutral, just remember to go back and loosen the nut 1/4 turn on the bottom of your handlebar so your handlebar turns freely. Okay, now we're going to talk about a couple of techniques called toe in and toe out. They're exactly what they sound like. If you toe in, your wheels are slightly pointing towards each other. If you toe out, your wheels are slightly pointing away from each other. Different trikes and different people will use different techniques to dial in their handling. You want to start by setting your trike up neutral. If it handles great, set up neutral, don't mess with it. It's a good way to keep your tires from wearing out prematurely, and it'll probably give you the best handling. These trikes and these frames are designed to handle an average size rider with them set up neutral, and that brings them into where they need to be when you're riding. What happens is the frame is made out of chromoly steel, and chromoly actually flexes somewhat. That's one of the reasons that the TerraTrikes have such a nice compliant ride and are very comfortable, is because the frame actually has some shock absorbing qualities. But as that happens, as the frame flexes, it changes the steering geometry just slightly. A super heavy rider will get on this, and as he sits on it, the wheels will actually start to toe in slightly. So if you're a larger rider, you're going to probably want to set your trike up a little bit toed out, so when you sit on it, it brings it in and tows it into where it needs to be. If you're a very, very lightweight rider, sometimes my young daughter will get on these, and they handle a little funny for her because they tend to be a little more toed out than they need to be, and when she sits on it, she doesn't compress the frame as much. So if you're a lightweight rider, you're going to want to do just the opposite, set it up just a slight bit toed out. Towing out any more than 1/8 of an inch or towing in any more than 1/8 of an inch difference between the front and back parallel dimensions between the wheels is too much. If you go more than 1/8 of an inch, you're going to prematurely wear out your tires, and the handling is just not going to be good at high speeds. The easiest way to do this is to have a friend help you. Use the technique that we just showed you of how to align the TerraTrike, but have yourself sitting in the trike at the time. That way your weight is on the machine and you're compressing the frame the way it needs to be compressed. If you have your weight on the machine and you set it up with 1/8 inch towed in with your weight on it, you've set it up perfectly. Again, an average size rider is going to sit on this thing. If it's set up neutral, when they sit on it, it's going to tow it in that little bit and it's going to end up being perfect. Now we're talking about very minor differences here that probably aren't going to be noticed at all riding unless you're going very, very fast. If you're set up 1/8 of an inch different and you're out riding around in the parking lot at a low speed, you're not going to notice a difference. But if you're shooting down Berthoud Pass in Colorado going 50 miles an hour, the handling will be very noticeable. So these are things that you want to think about: how you ride, how much you ride, where you ride. And think about your size and body weight when you're getting on the trike and what that's doing to it. If you have any questions whatsoever on how to set up the toe on a linkage steer trike, don't hesitate to call us at TerraTrike. Okay, now we're going to look at TerraTrike Rover, which is a direct steer trike. The Rovers and the Zoomers are both direct steer trikes, and the technique's just a little bit different. It's actually a little easier on the direct steer trikes. You start out with the same thing. You take these bolts and you loosen them up. These are the stop bolts on the tie rod. Okay, now that both of these bolts, there's only one on each end, have been loosened, remember that one end of that is a reverse thread, just like the other ones. You can turn this tie rod, and it's just one tie rod, and it'll change the toe all the way across. Okay, once you've gotten your tie rod stop nuts loosened up, and remember that one end of those is reverse threaded, just like on the linkage steer trikes, the next thing you need to do is you need to make sure that your wheels are parallel with each other. So you want to start by kind of eyeballing one wheel, make sure that it looks like it's parallel with the frame. Again, this is easier to do on the floor because you can look down on it and see that it's parallel. Once you've gotten that, you measure. I set this against the inside wall of the tire and measure to the center bead on this tire. Remember this measurement, and then you do the same thing on the trailing edge against the inside wall to the center bead, and I'm off a little bit, so I'm going to adjust the tie rod and then double check it. These measurements should be the same. Still not quite dialed in. I'm going to move that a little more. And there we go. That should be the same. I'm just going to double check it one more time to make sure. And there we go. Now you may notice that I'm measuring with the tape measure underneath the frame. And that's because the center of the wheels is actually slightly lower than the frame, and that gives me the widest possible point on the tire. Instead of measuring from here to here, the longer space you measure, you're going to get a more accurate measurement. Again, we're going to set this up neutral. Now, a little bit different on the Rovers and Zoomers, the direct steer trikes, is that these trikes do not flex nearly as much. And in fact, they flex so little, the frame flexes so little that it's imperceivable to us. So you do want to set these up neutral regardless of your weight, regardless of your size, regardless of your riding technique. If you want to play around with toe in or toe out techniques on these, you can do it to see if you can get a handle, if there's something that makes it handle better for you, but it's really not suggested because you'll end up with premature tire wear. If you set them up neutral, they're going to ride just great for you. Okay, after you've gotten everything lined up and you know you're parallel, again, you just tighten down your stop nuts. Make sure it's good and tight. Do the same thing at the other end. You're ready to ride. Okay, that's how you set up the alignment on your TerraTrikes. If you have any questions, as always, don't hesitate to call us here at TerraTrike.